Hey guys, Andrew Shrout. I'm here in the sideboard. I'm sitting with Aaron Barich. How's it going, Aaron?
It's going great, Trout.
It is going great for you. You have started 8-0 in this tournament, just sliced right through it with a deck that we haven't seen a lot of before. You're playing Abzan Aggro.
Right.
So tell me a little about why you chose to play this deck and how you arrived at this particular configuration.
Well, I decided to play Abzan Aggro because I wanted to play an aggro deck in the current format as it is, with cards being so powerful. The best way to beat people is, instead of playing your own powerful card, just make sure your opponent never get a chance to cast theirs.
Sure.
Just go under them as easy as possible. And the creatures in Standard at like the 1 and 2 drop slot are really bad outside of green and white.
Okay.
Because in green and white you get like Soldier of the Pantheon and Fleecemane Lion, and the other colors really don't have things that kind of match up to that.
Sure.
So I want to play a green-white aggro deck, and the best cards to go with that, the only wedge that we have is Abzan.
Sure.
So.
Okay, fair enough. So the Abzan aggro deck, there is kind of a pedigree with this. Like Mike SCGRICH played it to the top 4 of the Pro Tour.
Right.
He's the guy that kind of put the Anafenza style on the map. Your version is geared even lower. You brought up Soldier of the Pantheon. That to me is like the deck, the package that really sets this deck apart, I think. You have 4 Bloodsoaked Champion and 4 Soldier of the Pantheon. So tell me a little bit about these 1-drops and how they've been for you.
Right. Playing Abzan Aggro right now in Standard, if you're playing most lists are playing 5 drops like Wingmate Rock, and they're playing more lands.
Right.
However, cards like that aren't good when you're playing to try and go into your opponent, because you're playing 5 drops, but your opponent's cards are still going to be better than yours because they're still that much slower than you. So when you're playing 8 1-drops, you're able to go into your opponent a little better. And really, the reason the other lists don't play the 8 1-drops is because they don't have as well of a suite to support them, which this deck has.
All right. So the rest of your threats are kind of the same threats we've seen in the Abzan aggro decks, of course. Fleecemane Lion, Heir of the Wild, Drextasha Death Dealer, Anafenza, Siege Rhino. You can't leave home without those if you're playing Abzan. You do have 2 Boon Satyr, which is a card that I think has kind of fallen off of a lot of people's radar in these kind of like white-greenish aggro decks. How's that been for you?
Right. Boon Satyr he's not fantastic, but he's a role player. Really, like a 3-mana 4/2, there's a lot of Magma Sprays and Magma Jets going around and a lot of cheap removal for him. So he really isn't the best kind of 3-drop you've been wanting in these decks, and that's why people have been playing the Herald of Torment.
Yeah.
Plus Herald of Torment lets you fly over Elspeth and things like that. But in this deck, Boon Satyr is more important because, unlike most Abzan aggro lists, I'm playing 4 Heir of the Wilds. A lot play 2 and 4 Rakshasa Death Dealers.
Right.
And also this deck plays a lot more green sources than most lists. A lot of them are playing a lot of black sources, or they play 2 Urborgs to try and support a bunch of double black cards. And I'm not doing that. I decided to stick more to green-white.
All right, so just kind of consolidate the mana. So Boon Satyr is an instant speed pump spell, but it is not the only instant speed pump spell in this deck. You actually have a ton of them. One that you made a big splash with on camera, you have 3 Gather Courage. And I know you were very excited to play that card. And then, of course, 1 Become Immense, and then 4 Abzan Charm. So actually, counting the Boon Satyrs, 10 pump spells in the main deck. So tell me a little about Gather Courage in particular and how the pump spells have worked out for you.
So this is really the only way to play an aggro deck right now. All the aggro decks in Standard are playing a lot of pump spells, whether it be Titan Strengths or something of that nature, because our creatures right now are so good at blocking, and people are playing a lot of creatures to try and slow down aggro decks. That's how people were planning to stop the decks. So pump spells really help break through a lot of the threats in Standard. The one up Become Immense, it's a really, really powerful card that a lot of people they don't give it the credit for. It's a really hard card to play around. I mean, sometimes you just die to +6/+6. You can't do much about it. But the real star is Gather Courage. That is a card that I found when I was gather searching one day. I was just looking to build. I was looking for sweet things to play in Standard. I stumbled upon that. And right now in Standard, all of our 2-mana removal, Bile Blights, Lightning Strikes, Magma Jets, they all require your opponent's toughness to be 3 or less. This is so different from last Standard, where Doomblades and Ultimate Price were running amok. So on turn 2, if you play a 2-drop creature, all your 2-drops in the deck are green. So if your opponent on their turn with their 2 mana tries to kill your guy, your Gather Courage is a free tempo gain by just protecting and saving your guy. Because Standard's so tempo-based right now. It's all about putting guys in play or copying your opponent from doing so and just getting ahead. So Gather Courage is really great at that.
So if they spend like their turn 2 trying to keep your turn 2 off the board, you basically get to stop them from doing that for free. So it's kind of like a time walk in that sense.
In a sense, yes.
That seems pretty reasonable. That's a card that has not been on anybody's radar at all, I don't think.
Not really. I haven't seen anyone play it, but
you have done some pretty good work with it. Rounding out your main deck, you have the 1 Sorin Solemn Visitor, and you have 2 more of that card on the board. along with 4 Thoughtseize. You mentioned that like you kind of gear up a little and become a little more mid-rangey post-board. Tell me a little about that plan.
So against a lot of the decks in Standard, they're packing Drown in Sorrows, all the Abzan decks. So in those matchups, your 1-drops aren't very good, even with Gather Courage.
Right.
Because Gather Courage is only going to save one guy from the Drown in Sorrow, from the Anger of the Gods, whatever they're playing. So the best way to beat those decks is to kind of cut either all your soldiers or all 8 of your 1-drops and kind of turn into a little bit of a slower deck with Sorens and Thoughtseizes to kind of bring them down to your level, slow them down a little bit, and then make their Drown in Sorrows bad.
Okay.
So you make them have dead cards, so you have more card advantage over them in a sense.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk a little bit about your matchups. What are you hoping to play against when you're playing this style of deck?
This deck is really like well-rounded. It doesn't have any like fantastic matchups, but it can beat anything. It's really powerful.
All right.
Like the mana's a little finicky because you're a 3-color aggro deck. You want to play all your lands untapped, and that's really hard to do.
Okay.
So mainly the decks you're okay against everything, but the decks you don't want to play are really the Hornet Queen decks, like Whip Hornet Queen decks, Sidisi Whip. Those decks are really hard to beat. This deck cannot ever beat a Hornet Queen.
Sure. All right. Just decks that gum up the ground and just produce infinite blockers.
Right. Elspeth, Hornet Queen, those cards are really hard to beat. Hornet's Nest, like the red-green monsters decks that are playing Hornet's Nest, those can be rough if they play that card.
Okay.
But other than that, I feel like my cards match up fairly well against all my opponents.
All right. So basically your plan against those kind of cards is just to win the game before they show up, right?
Hopefully.
Seems like it's worked out for you so far. Again, I mentioned you started 8-0. So I take it you have not been Hornet Queen yet.
I have not, fortunately.
Right. How's your tournament gone so far?
I mean, I'm 8-0, so it's been going pretty good. I've played against a little bit of everything. I did play against the red-green monsters deck on camera against Anthony Lowry.
Yep.
I got kind of fortunate. He got mana screwed 2 games. I mean, I feel like I had good hands, so I might be able to beat him anyway, but we made
proactive.
We made it
That's
clean.
what the deck's trying to do, right?
Right. But I've played against pretty much every other Tier 1 deck in Standard at least once. Jeskai, Abzan. So.
Sweet. We've definitely made some noise, and you've got people's attention. So I believe you have locked up the top 8. It's hard to say because we don't know if you're going to be able to draw it or not, but I'm going to go ahead and say good luck in the top 8.
Thank you very much, Trout.
Yeah, thanks for sitting down with me. Stick around. We've got plenty more coverage coming at the Standard Open here in Richmond.